Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes, and today we'll be diving into a discussion on the updates coming from Syria regarding potential elections in the country. Syria's de facto leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, has commented on possible electoral timetables since the rebels ousted longtime ruler Bashar al-Assad. He says that holding elections in the war-ravaged country could take as long as 4 years. He reasoned it with the fact that a new census is to be conducted to specify the numbers of eligible voters in the country. Additionally, he said that drafting a new constitution will take up to 3 years. He said that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the most dominant military and political power now in Syria, would be dissolved at a national dialogue conference. The comments from al-Sharaa come as the new government in Damascus seeks to reassure its neighbours of peace and stability in the multi-ethnic country. Today we're joined by guests. We have Adrian Calamel, a terrorism scholar and fellow at Arabian Peninsula Institute. We have Mohammed El-Dashan, director at Oxcon Fragile States Consulting. We're also joined by Raymond Vickery, a former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce, and Mahesh Sachdev, former ambassador. I'd like to start with you first, Mahesh. We've had these comments coming from Syria, coming from the de facto leader, looking at an election timetable. Do you think this is something that's realistic, and do you think this is something that is going to happen and is the right time frame?
Thank you for having me. I believe it's doable, all right, but whether between now and the 4-year time span that the de facto leader of Syria has put together, whether this time span would be utilized for that purpose or whether there would be some disruptive or intentional movement of things which would complicate the timetable. Arab world is full of new leaders expressing such pious intentions to democratize, but the examples are few and far between. And what leader Ahmed Sharaa that you have indicated has spoken to Al Arabiya TV station of Saudi Arabia is that first they're going to be a national conference, and then there will be a constitution building body which would take 3 years. Census would be held, voters list would be prepared, delimitation of constituencies would take place, and election would then take place. Now, all that is a tall order, and previous elections in Syria, which was on paper a democracy, were rather flimsy exercises whose veracity was questionable. Whether the new dispensation intend to have credible elections, that's a big question. And I would give them the benefit of doubt that they intend to have a multi-ethnic society going through this kind of process so that every segment of the society has a voice, has a stake in the emerging political process. If that can be done, it will be quite nice and quite durable. But if it cannot be done, we can have Fitzpatrick's tendencies all over again. And Syria, which has multiple ethnicities who have never got on along together except under the thumb of a dominant tribe, the Alavis in particular for past 50 years, would have difficulty in coexisting with each other as a nation. Thank you.
Adrian Calamel, coming to you next. Looking at the rebel organisation that are now in power, they are allegedly going to be dissolved. Do you think this is a move to take Syria away from the past of this group in terms of their extremism views and actions? And how do you think that will be viewed by the wider world?
Great question. I absolutely think this is a movement to take away from their past associations. They've changed their name from Jabhat al-Nusra to HTS. Jelani changed his name, okay? He is saying, he's dressing up in suits. He's saying everything that's needed to say to the Western street to say that he's not Al-Qaeda, he's not he's not a jihadist. And what he wants is a democracy in this multi-ethnic, multi-pluralistic society. When we look at his language and we look at their past actions, the fact that the U.S. State Department had him on their most wanted list, as well as a person who is just several people that he's putting into positions within the government, I feel as though this is a giant ruse by HTS, by Jelani. I think it's being engineered by Erdogan. It seems as though Jelani went to a finishing school in Ankara to figure out everything that was needed to say to the West so that he could get the support. So my greatest fear is what we're going to have another Islamic emirate, just like Afghanistan, but this time it's going to be on the Mediterranean. And the Islamic Emirates are the building blocks to the caliphate. This is the long-term vision of Al-Qaeda, the Qutbists, the Sayyid Qutb theorists, these individuals. And 8 years cornered up in Idlib, I'm sorry, Jelani didn't change. He still has a bayat. I've never seen him officially distance himself from Al-Qaeda. And let's also look at the fighters, the so-called rebels that we're fighting. We have Al-Qaeda Chechens. We have Al-Qaeda Uzbeks, Tajiks. It was a bunch of foreign fighters that flew in, streamed in from Turkey into Idlib, and then launched this massive blitzkrieg. So how is this going to happen? How is this going to play out? It seems like a 4-year process is exactly what happened in Egypt with Morsi, and then finally when they finally put the Constitution in front of the people and they saw that this was a hostile takeover by the Muslim Brotherhood, the people came out in the street and said this cannot happen. And that's when the Sisi military stepped in. So my biggest fear, once again, is that you're having a radical Islamist group that controls a country. That controls a country on the Mediterranean, and that should be scary for Europe.
Raymond Vickery, in terms of the request that al-Sharaa has made to the US to drop the sort of sanctions that are placed currently upon the group, but also in Syria, how do you think this has been seen by the Joe Biden administration that's outgoing, but also the Donald Trump administration, which is more important as they will be the ones who will be dealing with the Syrian situation and the Syrian ongoing uprising as it happens and as we come towards a closer to a parliament in Syria?
Well, thanks for having me, Joshua. I think that no one should be under any illusions that there has been a complete change here and that you have a Western-style democracy which is on its way. That having been said, it seems to me that from the American perspective, both Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration, that there is a realization that we in the United States have to be engaged with the realities on the ground. It is somewhat encouraging that right noises are being made about not being a problem to other nations. And I think pragmatism is the order of the day. You mentioned the bounty that was on the head of this leader, and that has been basically de facto revoked at this time. The advent of democracy, of course, is dependent on a lot more than just elections. It's dependent upon human rights, the rule of law, the way in which minorities are treated. And that has yet to be worked out. There are U.S. diplomats on the scene. They found that the leadership, new leadership in Syria, at least at this point, appears to be pragmatic. But as has been pointed out, what is said and what reality is are often two different things everywhere, and particularly in Syria. So I think pragmatism and engagement are the order of the day from the U.S. perspective. Peace and democracy do not come about overnight. They must be waged just as is war. But I don't have any view that either the Biden or Trump administrations want to be involved militarily in regard to any of this, and yet we do have certain levers of power in terms of sanctions, in terms of economic relations, which a new government in Syria is going to need. And it is perfectly apparent and should be apparent to those who've just taken over that Russia is not an adequate read upon which to base the kind of support that's needed for a new regime in Syria. So there's a lot yet to be determined, but I don't think we ought to be too concerned about the timing of elections. We ought to look more closely at what is happening institutionally, whether or not there is some semblance of the rule of law, some respect for human rights, so that it can move toward democracy. It's never going to be the kind of democracy that you have in India or the United States, but it certainly can be a great improvement over the Assad regime.
Mohammed El-Dashan, I want to bring it back to Russia. We have heard comments from al-Sharaa regarding the certain alignments still there with Russia. How do you think that relationship can be built, given that Assad and Putin were such close allies? And do you think there is a potential world in which the countries can come back together under this new leadership?
Thank you, Joshua. I think I'll actually start where Raymond ended, where the key words being pragmatism. And ultimately, I think the guiding principle for everyone's engagement needs to be what is best for the Syrian people who have suffered for the last 13 years of a brutal civil war that has, massively damaged infrastructure and has made the country in a far more difficult position to govern as it is today. Now, regarding Russia, Russia isn't the only external actor that has interest in the country, I think, and you can see sort of that merry-go-round of foreign dignitaries that have been visiting the countries for the past couple of weeks. Their interests, they are all naturally following their own country's interests, not necessarily the Syrian people's. And therefore, for us as observers or as external actors trying to engage with the country, we need to see what needs to be what will be the best to serve the Syrians. Now, Russia will try to rebuild its relationship with Damascus. They will have to realign the relationships with other key actors, notably Turkey, which will now be a bit of a kingmaker when it comes to dealing with external actors. Will act more or less as a gatekeeper, shall we say, rather, is the word I was looking for. We're more of a gatekeeper as the key ally to Damascus. But ultimately, elections or not, I think the emphasis should really be on development and how we can improve the lot of the lives of the Syrians, where we're talking economic development, infrastructure development, or as Raymond was saying, what are the key elements of rule of law, transitional justice, and so on. So it shouldn't be, we shouldn't be looking at this as, I want to say, almost expecting Sharia to fail. If anything, if we're taking things from an element of pragmatism, then we should see what is it that the international community can offer to support the current rulers in Damascus for the benefit of the Syrian people. Not so much picking winning horses, but rather seeing how we can best step in, and also, not allow external actors that would want to bring the country back into a semblance of a client state, shall we say. The idea would be hopefully to move out of the client state as Syria has been for the last half a century almost, and into one that serves its own population.
Mahesh Sachdev, looking at the instability not just in Syria but across the region, do you think this could potentially be a bit of hope for the region in terms of some stability, given the situation that's happening, of course, with Israel and Hamas, and also in Lebanon where the ceasefire is holding, but there still has been some action? Do you think that this can be a sort of way in which the region can have some hope, even though there are, of course, thoughts from within the region itself, but also moving forward, bringing it back to the people? That word hope I want to focus on, and is this a chance for hope, not just for the region, but the people of Syria?
I think you're saying two different things here. One for the people of Syria, another one for the region. They're not synonymous, they're not necessarily overlapping. You can have a dictatorship in Syria which can bring peace to the region. That's not impossible. It will be perfect if both exercise of pluralistic democracy at home and regional moderation can be exercised by the people in power in Damascus right now. I have been in Syria in my formative years, and I learned Arabic there, so I can speak with some authority. I think Syrians are sort of tolerant people in general, and they, even at the worst of times, there was certain modus vivendi among them. And I think the challenge at home with the HTS or its new avatars would be to bring that mutual tolerance back again. Externally, I think it will be more difficult. Syria has had, at least since Camp David, a rejectionist outlook. They totally rejected any peacemaking with Israel, and they were in minority of one when Iraq and Iran had a fight in the 80s, and have sort of mastered the art of being at the precipice, expecting people to rescue them from there. From that poise and dangerous living during Assad's time and Bashar's time to becoming a harbinger of peace is a difficult task, but can be done. Syria is a pivotal country. Much of Levant looks at it. Peace in Iraq, to some extent in Iran, and Jordan, Lebanon, of course, depends on Syria, how Syria pans out. And if the new dispensation in Damascus adopts the same kind of policies that, despite rejectionist rhetoric of Ba'ath Party and the National Democratic Front ruling Syria, they did almost nothing which would entangle them with Israel to their disadvantage. They kept the Golan Front quiet. They did not support Hezbollah. at least not materially or with soldiers. And there is almost nothing for Hamas, with whom they have somewhat tense relations, since Hamas, being a Sunni outfit, had supported Arab Spring against Bashar al-Assad. So, if from that position Syria can, new rulers in Syria can make important gestures and realign themselves, I think they can still become a cornerstone of a peace deal in Levant and in Iraq, where Kurdish population and Shia population overleads. Now, much would depend on how Turkey and HTS relations pan out. HTS was not a proxy of Turkey, even though it was used by they used all the goodwill, etc. It was Syrian Liberation Army, which was supported by Turkey with material help and so on, who are engaged against Kurdish SDF. So it's not a given that Syria, the new rulers, and Turkey would continue with a client and owner or mentor relationship forever. Ottoman Turks are not particularly, Ottoman history is not particularly liked by Arabs, and Syrians have had their own equations, which is complicated with Turkey. Part of Syria was given by French mandate to Turkey, and that remains a vexing question. Kurdish issue would remain a vexing question, and the refugees in Turkey, how they have been treated by Turks, would remain a complicating factor. So I don't expect Turkey to always remain an overlord in Damascus. The economic situation that Syrian rulers have inherited is dire. In 11 years, Syria's GDP has fallen to a tenth of its value. Per capita terms, they are now lower than $400 per capita, which is threshold of poverty. More than 80% of Syrians live below poverty line. So the infrastructure is all damaged and gone, and all that would keep Mr. Ahmed Shara and his coterie looking for foreign aid, which can come only from oil-rich Gulf countries, and through Turkey perhaps, or through other contract providers, but it remains to be seen if West would be able to come to some modus vivendi quickly with HTS and its new avatars. Only then the sanctions would be lifted, and Syria's new rulers would be able to acquire some semblance of recognition and assistance through multilateral agencies such as World Bank, IMF, and others. Till then, it's going to be a precarious existence politically and economically, which will keep them under leash and waiting for things to improve before they can assert themselves domestically and in the region. Thank you.
Adrian, I want to bring it back to this timeline that's been set out, and looking at the period of time it might take for an election to happen, do you think this could impact a rise of something like ISIS, which has been a concern for people across the Western nations and also leaders as well?
Yeah, we can't forget that. Although the physical caliphate of ISIS has been destroyed, they've scattered around the region. A lot have moved to Africa, but when the Blitzkrieg went through Syria, prisons were being released, and in those prisons were ISIS fighters. I have seen with my own eyes an ISIS patch on one of the alleged rebels. I think this is a real concern. And we have to remember that when ISIS, the break with ISIS and what we'll call HTS or Jabhat al-Nusra was it was pretty much about battle space. Who was going to control the battle space in Syria? Where Zawahiri came down and said, Jelani, you get Syria, Baghdadi, you get Iraq. And then it became along a theological difference about, hey, you can't create a state, an Islamic state, before there's building blocks. There's emirates, and then you create the caliphate. So the rise of ISIS never went away. They just scattered. They just don't have a central leadership. They don't have a state. They don't have the oil revenue, the type of schemes that they made to actually function as a state. So there is a concern that they will come back, and they will, as we see in Afghanistan, they will carry out attacks. They will carry out bombing attacks, and I expect the same thing to happen in Syria. The big question is, for me, and I hate to sound extremely cynical about this, is Al-Qaeda or Jabhat al-Nusra or HTS, are they using ISIS as a counterbalance? Good cop versus bad cop. That is one of my greatest concerns. And I want to talk about economic development and help in Syria. We have to look at the Americans' history over the last 4 years in Afghanistan. We have been sending somewhere between $20 billion to $40 billion a week to that government. Fungible money that can be used towards terrorism. We consider the Taliban to be our counterterrorism partners. The Taliban has the same relationship with Pakistan as Turkey has with HTS. HTS knows that without the Turks, no matter what anybody says, they would not be there. Erdogan is the kingmaker. He allowed them to be sheltered from 2017 to 2024 in Idlib. And then he fueled it. He is a neo-Ottoman expansionist, and to deny that is, I think it's dangerous, because we saw Erdogan do this in 2011. He was heavily involved in the Syrian civil war. He wanted Syria. He considers that as the first building block to his neo-Ottoman agenda. But he got beaten down. He got pushed back, pushed into a corner with his proxy, and I will call it his proxy. It's Al-Qaeda. We also have to remember Erdogan is Muslim Brotherhood. He is an Islamist at the end of the day. So he is going to support HTS. There's two messages. Again, there's one for the Arab street and there's one for the Western street. And the Western street is drinking the Kool-Aid and thinking that everything's going to turn out fine. If we go through a process, we have elections, everything's going to work out okay. But let me just say, I heard Hamas, I heard some of these other groups that were opposed and at times to HTS or Jabhat al-Nusra. We have to remember at the beginning of the Syrian civil war, Hamas was fighting with al-Nusra. There were Sunni groups fighting with al-Nusra until they realized that that was a losing battle at the time. Then they said, okay, we'll stop and we're going to regain our funding for the Islamic Republic. So this shakes out after 4 years. Just keep it in the back of your mind. What's the relationship going to be like between the Islamic Republic and Syria? I think it's going to be much different. I think they're going to patch things up extremely quickly, and you're going to have a united front America, the West, needs to lose the Sunni-Shia divide argument. It works at certain times, but eventually they reconcile and the guns get pointed in a different direction.
Adrian Calamel, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you also to Mohammed El-Dashan. Thank you, Raymond Vickery, and also thank you, Mahesh Sachdev. We will continue to bring you the updates from across Syria, while we'll also continue to take a look at the wider region in further debates. Stay tuned on NewsX.